my toenail removed was I made an appointment to see a doctor, and the doctor called in a student, and the doctor said to the student, he has an ingrown toenail, I think we should remove the toenail, that'll solve the problem. So the student shot my big toe up with lots of Novocaine, and then he peeled my toenail off.
Well, that's disgusting.
I didn't watch it.
Oh, good. I was gonna judge you if you did.
My toe was so numb, I just looked at the ceiling, and I could feel him touching my toes until he said he was done. And then they wrapped it up, and then I would look at it. But, yeah. When, days later, when I unwrapped it and looked at it, it was just a toe without a toenail. And it seemed, and it actually felt so much better than it did when it was ingrown, that I was just happy as could be, because I really hated that ingrown toenail.
Oh, man.
Yeah. And I still have a little bit of it, but it's very mild these days. But the toenail still wants to curve down, but it's not anywhere near as bad as it used to be. But anyhow, and that was just a student. I know he'd never done it before.
And like, because Mom has told me a tale of like when someone ran over her feet and like her big toes like are sort of popped off now. But they're not fully in. Like they popped off and they grew back, but it's like
The bones aren't in correct position.
well, it's not the bones so much as just like the nail part of it is a little more on top of the surface than it was.
It still has to grow from underneath. But yeah. Good. So there's that. And then there's this. Bob and Jim enjoying a high draft number.
What?
In those days, they were drafting people to go in the service to go fight the war in Vietnam. So if you had, let's say, there's 365 days in a year. So if you were, and they would pick the number by lottery. So if you were one of the first 100 days they picked, you'd get drafted and have to go to war. But if you got a number like 280, you would never get drafted.
Oh. And 2 out of 3 of you didn't have to go.
Right.
And you didn't have to go over there.
Because my dad, I did get a notice to report for duty, and my dad promptly called a friend of his in Washington and said, my son is too smart a guy to waste carrying a gun in a jungle in Vietnam. He deserves a better job with our military service. And this guy was a general in the Air Force, so he got me in the Air Force. And I had been down a month before to the Air Force recruitment office to see about getting in, and the guy and the recruiter said, nope, I'm all full. I don't have any room for you. So when I was told to report to him, and I walked in and I said, I'm Jim Schaefer, and you're supposed to have gotten a message from Jack Blick in Washington about me. And he says, oh yeah, I got that. And because of you, one of my recruits is going to end up having to carry a gun in the jungle in Vietnam. And I said, that's too bad. What am I supposed to do? And he says, well, you have to report on this date. And he gave me a day to report for duty. So then on that, the day before, I got on a bus, my mom and dad waved goodbye, and I took a bus to Oakland, spent the night in a barracks. That would be having reported for duty. They put me up in a barracks, and the next day they put me on a plane to Amarillo, Texas. In Amarillo, Texas, they shaved my head and told me to cut my mustache. And after 6 weeks in Amarillo, Texas, I got orders to go to Fort Worth, Texas, and report to medical school. And I called my dad and I said, they want me to be a medic. And he said, bullshit. He called his friend in Washington, and a couple days later, I went to 1 day of school as a medic and was told that the next day I'd be learning how to give a shot. And instead, I got a message to report to data processing school. And so from then on, I learned data process, how to run computers with cards.
With cards?
They take a card like this and punch holes in it.
Oh,
That's the
yeah.
information.
Wow.
And we run between a small deck and multiple trays for a job. Run all these cards, run thousands of cards through a machine, and it would read thousands of cards to print out a report about how many, what sort of supplies they had at some base somewhere. I never, in my 3 years and 9 months at Travis Air Force Base, running computers, I never knew what the hell I was working on. I can't remember one thing that a friend of mine said he printed it. You could run the cards through a printer and they would tell you what was on them. But when I ran them, they didn't have anything. They were unprinted. They were just, they had the data on them, but they didn't tell you what they were. One guy said, he showed me one card and it said human remains. And I thought, I took him seriously for a few years, but in retrospect, I doubt if that's really what the card said. I think he printed a card to say that. Anyways,
Oh man.
there's us on my weekend. That's how I spent my weekend in the Air Force, walking with my brother and Jim through the fields outside Santa Rosa.
Wait, so you could leave the...
On weekends, every weekend, I would drive 60 miles to Santa Rosa.
That's a lot of miles just to say hi to your brother and a friend.
Compared to staying in the Air Force, it was a no-brainer.
Fair enough.
It wasn't a decision. It was let me out of here. And I would go back to Santa Rosa and hang with them, and we would go hang with my friends and their friends, and girls that used to throw themselves at me before I went in the Air Force, now looked at me like, it wasn't disgust, it was shock, it was surprise, it was, what the hell happened to you? But they could, of course, figure it out that I had to go in the military.
Is it because the hair
Yeah,
and
everybody, now everybody was growing it. Now, before I left, nobody had hair like that. Nobody.
Really?
Before I went in, the longest anybody had hair. Well, there's a better one, but this is. Where did I see that? Maybe it was in here. This is the, you can barely see me in there. That was super long hair
Can I talk?
in those days.